Did any of the following actually happen as described in these scary stories? I saw Dogman leading a pack of wolves. Dear Scary Stories NYC. This story happened when I was 22 and hiking alone in the Noatak National Preserve in Alaska. It's bear country up there, and wolf country too. Don't hike there alone like I did. I think I had a death wish at the time, or maybe I was desperately seeking out a rite of passage. All I know is I left college without warning and began a series of plane, car, and boat trips that eventually led to me being completely alone in one of the wildest places on Earth, way up on the northern tip of Alaska. If you ask any nature lover, they'll tell you just how wild Alaska is. Interestingly, at least to me, if you ask David Paulides or UFO hunters or paranormal enthusiasts, they'll often tell you how wild Alaska is too. Although perhaps the most beautiful and awesome place on Earth, it's also one of the most terrifying and deadly. There's a mystery to the place that feels deeper than any other mystery, and I was drawn to it in order to begin to understand just how small I really was and am. That was my personal trip at the time. I had to learn my insignificance before anything important or sacred could begin to creep into my life. The most awesome sight I ever observed in Alaska, though, was the evening when I was delayed getting back to my camp by a pack of Arctic wolves crossing my path. At least, they were large and white, so I'm calling them Arctic wolves. I'm not a zoologist, though, so I might be wrong. They were relaxing together, standing and sitting and lying around, and they howled in unison. And then, from the bushes, emerged another creature so impressive that he took my breath away. I watched as the big daddy of all wolves walked out, or loped out of the bushes. This wolf was a darker gray than the others, and stood at least a hand taller at the shoulder. None of the others reacted in any way to his appearance, and it was clear they ran as a pack. Then, this largest of all large wolves, the darker one, did something that twisted my mind into a pretzel and made my stomach feel dizzy inside. He leaned up somehow. He went from standing on all fours to standing upright, just the same as you and me. On his belly you could see a lighter colored fur, and I wondered if these animals were a family or just a collection of friends. Could this bipedal thing actually be canine? I mean, could it breed with canines, or else what species did it belong to? Was it a mutant wolf, or something else entirely that ran with these wolves for survival reasons? My sense of wonder overwhelmed me, and instead of putting distance between myself and this dangerous pack of predators, I remained behind, hidden and freezing, watching them cavort and play, listening to their mournful wails. When they eventually moved on, I was sad to see them go in a deeper way than I had ever felt sadness before. I said a prayer of thanks for having been granted the gift of seeing creatures so extraordinary, and for being given such unanswerable questions to ponder for the rest of my life. Is the Dogman really a mutant wolf? Or is it a separate species? Was he there in that pack as a brother, as a leader? Was his relationship to them as a master to his dog pack? Or did I witness some form of family? I'm too old now to do the things I did when this story took place, and I'll never find out the answers for myself. Maybe someday somebody else will. For me, though, I'm content merely with the questions raised by the fact that I saw a dogman leading a pack of wolves. Don't touch that dial. We've got another all-new Dogman story coming up in a second. But first, our EP is Kathy. She's full of real empathy. And if you lack sympathy, she'll zap you telepathically. Please join me in thanking the great Kathy Barrickman for being one of the greatest people on planet Earth. We thank her for her magnificence by showing her our weekly secret uncensored Dogman stories far too wild to show on this channel. Not only that, but also our 15 hours of archived uncensored stories. Because Kathy is the best of the best, we also show her our episodes a day in advance whenever it's humanly possible. Now, we all know you can't ever actually be as great as the great Kathy Barrickman, who is really great, but you can still get treated as though you are. All you have to do is either join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com or do what Kathy Barrickman did and click the join link below this video to become a channel member. Thank you, Kathy Barrickman. And now, for our second scary Dogman story of the episode. I feel like I have to put an advisory before this next one. Although it's rated PG and not outrageous in any of those kinds of ways, we generally like to keep this show a no politics zone, something you can listen to in order to escape from all the negative dreariness and stressful current events that seem to have permeated everything else on the internet. This is one story, though, where current events are tied indirectly with the appearance of a potentially very dangerous dogman. If you humor the story contributor and let him rant for a while, you'll discover he's actually describing a very unique sort of dogman encounter. Once you get past the beginning setup, it's basically issues free from then on. Sort of. And the title we've settled on for this particular narrative is The Bloody Stake Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Some people in New York argue that our governor's edict that supermarkets no longer carry plastic bags is needed to save our environment. Others point out quite correctly that nearly all of the world's pollution is caused by a very few corporations and one large country, none of whom I will name because you can Google that for yourself. Based on these undeniable facts, some people might say that forcing the poor and working class to shoulder the entire burden of saving the environment, being told they are responsible for worldwide pollution, is an abuse of the majority by the elite minority. It is, they might argue, a tax on the poor so that the rich don't have to clean up their own act. But no matter what side of the fence you find yourself on when it comes to this often under-discussed issue, I would like to warn you that there may be an extra dimension to this, as the governor's plastic bag law led to me being followed home by an absolutely terrifying creature. I'll describe what threatened my very life to you, but I think I already know what it was. I think it was a dogman. Now, for those of you who aren't understanding what I'm talking about, our governor mandated a change to our culture so drastic, it literally changed the lives of every working-class New Yorker in several negative and unfair ways. First of all, the poor have, for my entire life, used plastic bags from supermarkets in order to carry things around, to throw out garbage in, to put the cat litter into. There were innumerable uses for this free resource readily available to all impoverished and hardworking Americans. Sometimes having those free bags to use for these necessities means the difference between being able to afford dinner or not. Now, you either have to spend money on a reusable bag, also made of plastics usually, or be charged money for an inferior paper bag whose handles always break. You are also, in many places, made to bag things for yourself when we have always, since we were children, had our groceries bagged for us by professionals. Now they stand there uncomfortably and watch you as you hold up the line. It's as though the governor hates us and wants us to know that happy time is over. He wants us to know that we are no longer going to be served, that we're the new slave class. It's infuriating, but it gets even worse, as I learned just the other night. I wanted to buy red meat. I know they don't want you to eat red meat any longer, but I'm getting a little sick with what they want, so I bought some red meat. Of course, all of my life when I had bought meat in the supermarket, the clerk would place it first in a little plastic bag, and then place that in the larger plastic bag. In this way, the blood of the steak wouldn't leak out all over the rest of my groceries. It was a common courtesy I had come to expect, but I had forgotten. The governor has outlawed common respect being expressed toward consumers and the public. So the red meat got placed with my Little Debbie Swiss rolls and my box of frozen breakfast sandwiches into a brown paper bag that I got charged a nickel for. Stop, I hear you saying. Take the meat out and put it in a separate bag and then give them another nickel. Well, that's what a smart person would have done. Me, I had gotten lulled to sleep by a lifetime of service from the people I paid money to. See, I come from a time when the customer was always right. Now the customer is a bad person who needs to hide his face behind a mask of ignominy and bag his own groceries in a public form of shaming that slows down the supermarket lines for everybody, forcing the humiliating experience to last even longer than was already necessary. So, I was stupid, and I left the red meat in with my other food items, packaged in cardboard boxes, in my brown paper bag, and I left. Yes, I was stupid, and what happened next taught me that it isn't safe to be stupid in this world any longer. Things are different now. You better cover your butt and prepare ahead, because we're all pretty much on our own from here on out. I live in a part of New York State that's beautiful in every season, even winter. Some might say, especially winter. I tell you, it's a whole lot prettier when the sun is shining. It's a lot easier to walk to and from the supermarket when the ground isn't all frozen and hard, too. Of course, this wasn't my first time walking back in the dark. I never really had a problem with it before, but they always gave me plastic bags to carry things home from the supermarket in before. I could hook 2 or even 3 over each wrist and walk without slipping. I could buy a lot more at one time back then than I can now that I could only carry 1 brown paper bag home. Almost as soon as I reached the shortcut through the dark woods, the paper handles of the bag had come loose and the bag fell from my grip to the ground. From then on, I had to hold it from the bottom, gripping it like I was holding a baby. It made it harder to watch my step, and I slipped a few times, causing me to become a little angrier at our beloved governor each time I landed on my butt on the ice. As I walked through the woods with a cold behind, the wind seemed to pick up, giving me the head-to-toe shivers. I remember I was cursing myself for not just spending the extra money and ordering something delivered for dinner. I was definitely not aiding my immune system by freezing myself to death in the woods, all in the name of a little $5 supermarket steak. I became extra gloomy, worried that I would catch a cold or the flu or something worse, all because of this failure of a supermarket run. I had no idea that in a minute or two, I was going to wish these were still my worst problems. I swore I could hear someone stalking me in the woods. I tried to convince myself that it was an echo. In fact, most of the time, the sound did seem to be very similar to the noises I was making. I would take a step, and then hear someone or something else doing the same. But sometimes the sound would stop too soon, and other times it would go on for too long past when I had stopped moving. I became more and more frightened as I became increasingly convinced that I wasn't hearing an echo and that I really was actually in some serious danger. I stopped moving, leaned on a tree, hugged my groceries to my chest, and tried to breathe as quietly as I could in order to listen to my surroundings. It was hard to hear anything over my wildly beating heart, but soon I was able to focus on the sound just as there was a loud crashing noise behind me. Leaves and branches flew in all directions as a man covered in fur with what I thought was a dog head mask leaped out of the bushes at me. I squealed like a little girl and watched as the man ignored me completely and bent down to smell? Wait, what was he smelling? There was something dark on the icy snow patch underneath the creature man. In fact, now that I looked, there was a trail of this dark substance. It led from where the dog-headed fellow was over closer to me. How was it leading to me? That made no sense at all until I looked down to see that the blood from my steak was leaking out of my bag. It was a trail of cow blood that the animal man was following. I had been dripping it for my entire trek. A quick look into my brown paper bag revealed that the entire bottom was soggy with the juice from the leaking package of red meat. My box of breakfast sandwiches and my imitation yodels were both soaked in blood. I felt sick. Not only was my dinner ruined, not only was my dessert destroyed, but my breakfast had been sacrificed to the devil as well. And also that our governor can boss the poor around. How I imagined him laughing in that moment if he could see me and realize that his policies hadn't only made my life harder, they had actually led me to losing 2 meals, 1 snack, and now that the dog-headed man was noticing that I smelled an awful lot like cow blood, possibly my life as well. What a victory for the oligarchy. The dogman looked up at me, growling, and I dropped my groceries on the spot. If he wanted that steak and those little Debbies, I reasoned, let him have them. I tossed my soggy, ruined grocery bag onto the ground midway between us, and I took off running for home. In my mind, I was visualizing the creature, and I was trying to guesstimate how fast it could go, and, by extension, which way I should run to increase my chances of survival. Make no mistake about it, I had left self-pity and depression behind. Life had seemed so terrible to me when I was slipping on the ice, but as soon as I looked into the eyes of the dogman, life sure seemed way too precious to want to let go of. It's amazing how hard we'll fight to keep our awful lives when we understand that they are genuinely being threatened. Although this was an extremely unpleasant experience, I was more alert and aware than I've ever been in my life. When you know that everything may end at any second, then each moment seems like a beautiful eternity. I ran at full speed, yes, but I also visualized the monster man behind me and tried to understand what its needs were and what its next moves would be. Would it stop at my groceries and devour the steak? Would it eat the Swiss rolls? Would it call off the chase after this meal? Or would that serve as an appetizer and only make him even hungrier? For me, in my mind, I saw the creature's eyes. While fierce and savage, even inhuman, I would not call them evil. They did not glow as in many stories I've read. This was a wolf or dog-headed creature that stood upright like a human, but was not a human. Yes, it had tall pointed ears, almost as long as those of a hare, but more triangular in shape. Yes, its hind legs were bent more like those of a canine than a human or an anthropoid. Its front paws, although absurdly and terrifyingly large, were not hands. They were paws. There was no opposable thumb. In that sense, this was more of a canine than a human, but it did walk on its hind legs, so it was not an ordinary canine by any stretch of the imagination. I cried as I ran toward home, which made it harder to breathe and harder to see. I was trying not to feel like I was about to die. The Dogman had my steak. He had my frozen breakfast sandwiches. I assured myself that the groceries would taste better than me. I had to be safe. I must have been safe. Yet, it still sounded like someone or something was following after me. I needed to know if I was making that noise myself, if I was imagining that I was still being chased. After all, the trail of blood ended at that ruined, bloody brown paper bag, and that should have been where any scavenger worth his salt would be focused on. Not on me. Curiosity overtaking me, I paused for a second to catch my breath, leaning against a tree to rest for a second as I looked behind me, and before I could even see what was following me, I saw why I was being followed. When I was holding the brown paper bag like a baby tight to my chest because the paper handles had broken off of it, I didn't realize that the blood from the red meat I had bought had leaked all over my shirt. I was a bloody mess. I didn't look like I was being trailed by a werewolf. I looked like I was the werewolf himself after a kill. If I didn't know it was steak blood, I would have presumed I was a psycho murderer running through the woods. Any human would logically run from me in fear, but to the Dogman, I would smell like wounded prey. I realized it must have disregarded the bag that I dropped, thinking that the blood was coming from me and not the bag. He had to have presumed I was wounded and weak, and that was why his instincts dictated that he had no choice but to pursue me until I was too weak to run any further. The Dogman was not being evil. He was only following his biological imperative to pursue the weak in order to stay strong. I just walked into the wrong end of the food chain. There was nobody to blame except myself, and I knew this. Not the Dogman, not the governor this time, not anyone, but me. Why? Because I expected to be taken care of by the world. I expected to be treated kindly by the world. You know who gets treated kindly? Pets. That's who. People love their pets, at least until the day when they get too old and become inconvenient. What happens to the pets then? Well, that's what's happening to all of us now, at least in my opinion. If we don't want to be euthanized, we're going to have to fend for ourselves from now on. Our owners no longer think we're cute, and so they're driving us over by the highway and kicking us out of the car. And you know what? That's where the Dogman lives. And most especially, the bloody steak Dogman.
Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it. You can become a channel member by clicking the join link below. Then you can check our community page to find the links to 10 hours or more of secret, uncensored Dogman stories too wild to be told on this channel. Your other option is to join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. That's Peter's homemade club, where he will personally email you the links as well as occasional secret club messages. You may also be included as an executive producer in a future episode. You have a scary experience you want to tell us about? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com, or else call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LESS-SCARY. The machine cuts off every few minutes, so if you have a long story, please keep calling back and we'll piece it together later on. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.